Big Podcast.
Funny story about how far our messages can go with podcasting and radio. I did a thing for the local NPR affiliate, and I was hanging with this guy this weekend. Saw him, just checking up on him, trying to get him some other media opportunities. Anyway, my friend's talking to somebody else. A guy walks over to me, and he said, "Do you know that guy was just on NPR this week?" And it was surreal, right? Because he had no idea that I was on NPR, as he called it, the NPR affiliate, with this guy. And I love that about podcasting. I love it that we can get a message out. It can go to a lot of people. We don't know who it's going to. Yet, our level of anonymity, because I prefer to keep a low profile, it can be a lot. I mean, I want you to know what I do, but when I go out into the world, I'd rather be anonymous. And that comes from the music business. I've worked with a lot of people that are very famous. You can't go anywhere with them. Anyway, let's get to the episode. It's Build a Big Podcast, the marketing podcast for podcasters. If you want to grow your podcast, make more money with your podcast, make a difference, get a message out, just like this guy did with me via the NPR affiliate. You can make that happen. I'm going to help you do that. BigPodcast.com is the website. I've got a newsletter that goes out every Friday morning, New York City time. It is called Big Podcast Insider. This is the audio edition of issue number 199. If you want to find out more about that, if you want to get the links and more information about what I'm talking about, it's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Don't write it down. You're going to have it memorized by the end of this episode, I promise. Here's what's in this episode. Woo! Message from Mr. Cruz. Woo! It's support, not a donation. Woo! Does your podcast have an enemy? Woo! Spotify algorithm. Tips for podcasters to boost rankings. Woo! Pop that P. Woo! Also some classified ads, things to help you grow your podcast, get more people to your podcast, make money with your podcast, to make a podcast that people care about. The things that this podcast is about. This episode of Build a Big Podcast brought to you by Riverside.fm. Sounds very tranquil, doesn't it? Riverside. Or like a Led Zeppelin song, Traveling Riverside Blues. No. It's a virtual studio that makes recording and editing at the highest quality possible, accessible to anyone. You're going to look and sound your best. Riverside records you and your guests locally, bypassing poor or unstable internet connections, giving you studio quality audio and video. And again, this is remote. So yeah, it's recording locally, but it's local where you are and local where your guest is. So if you're in Nashville like me, your guest is in Chicago, you're going to sound like you're in the same room. One of the coolest things about it is their AI tools. They've got something called Magic Clips. It automatically finds the most interesting parts of your podcast suitable for social media. It's going to give you small clips. You can put those clips on your social media platform, bring people into your podcast. Sounds good, right? You want to try it out? Here's the offer. Go to riverside.fm, get an account. You can try it for free. I'm going to give you a couple of hours, do an interview, do 2 interviews, kick the tires, look under the hood, see how it works for you. If you like it, I've got a discount code. This is going to get you 15% off. URL again, riverside.fm. Get 2 hours free. If you want to stick around, 15% off with the code BIGPODCAST, BIGPODCAST. That's riverside.fm. That discount code for 15% off, Big Podcast, BIGPODCAST. All right, let's do it. I'm going from thing to thing to thing, all of them about podcasting. When I move on to the next thing, you're going to hear this sound. Whoa! That's the demarcation point. That's how you know. Go to newsletter.bigpodcast.com if you want the links and more information. I'm moving on. Ready? Whoa! A message from Mr. Cruz. We got a big election coming up, and this week, I got a text message from Ted Cruz, which is weird because I'm in Nashville, not in Cancun. I kid, but that's Nashville, Tennessee, not Nashville, Texas. So it was still weird. I don't know how this guy got my number, why he's texting me. I'm also getting messages from candidates running for something in New Hampshire. Something, I don't know what it is. And I thought that was strange. Now, maybe what's happening is, because I've got one of those numbers that, you know, it's like 777-9311, something that a lot of people know. So they write it out. So I get all sorts of weird calls, weird text messages. I'm a digit off from a hospital. That's always weird. Well, he's not breathing. It's like, oh. I'm mentioning it here because I see a lot of podcasters doing something similar. And what that is they're going for anybody and everybody. Whether they're in Texas, whether they're in New Hampshire, they're going for the guy in Tennessee. Now, for voting in this country, it doesn't matter if I'm not geographically near you. I've got to be in New Hampshire. I've got to be in Texas. It's the same thing with radio. If I tell you I'm on 100.1, that's great as far as the signal goes. But if you're outside of that signal, not going to matter to you. So you don't see me promoting the radio show on the internet. However, podcasting, that can go everywhere. However, not everybody is interested in what you are talking about. Still, I see people get on social media, spam everybody about their podcast. Listen to me, listen to me, listen to me. It's like, well, what are you talking about, man? If I'm not into it, you might as well be in Texas when I'm in Tennessee. It doesn't matter that I can get to it. I'm not into it. So let's get back to this text message from Ted Cruz. I will say this. One thing that he did right, which was ask for money. He asked for it. Closed mouths don't get fed. You've heard that. So he said, hey, give me some money. The issue again, I mean, maybe he's betting on me being philosophically aligned to him and caring about something that happens 1,000 miles away from me. Maybe there's that. But he would have been better off finding people in Texas, finding people who are true believers for whatever his philosophy is, and going to them, not to me. That's like these guys promoting their podcast everywhere, anywhere. Well, it's on the internet. It's available to everybody. It's for people 8 to 88. All ages, all races. Everybody loves this. Not true. But in general, I do like the concept of asking for what you want, letting people know that you've got a podcast. People are not going to search you out and subscribe to your podcast on their own. You've got to let them know that you exist. Let them know what you need, which is, hey, listen to my podcast, subscribe to my podcast, a listen, a review. But make sure it's the people who could review you. In that case, it would be the people who are already listening to your podcast. And if you want people to listen to your podcast, make sure they are interested in what it is that you podcast about. So that's good. 1, ask for what you want. But also, 2, as I've been saying, not everybody's a good match for what you do. So don't mindlessly ask everybody just because it's easy to send out a ton of emails or text messages. Hey, listen to me, listen to me, listen to me. Not true. Not everybody cares. You've got limited resources, so focus on the people who are most likely to want to listen to your podcast. Do you know who that is? You want my help? Big Podcast Amp, audio monetization program. I'll talk about that in a minute. Something related before I do. You need a subscribe page for your podcast. Do not tell people, well, where do you get your podcast? They don't know. We've got all these YouTubers saying, I got a podcast. People head to YouTube a lot of times. So when somebody hears the word podcast, YouTube's the first place they go to. What if you're not on YouTube? You need to get into a podcasting platform if you want them on a podcasting platform. And I'll tell you why you do want them on a podcasting platform if you've got a podcast. YouTube is crazy. It's easy to think, oh, I've got a bunch of people seeing my message, hearing my message, because you see that counter. A lot of people on there, right? But when you look at the stats on YouTube, and most podcasters have never done this, you see that somebody might be on there 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds. Compare that with a podcasting platform. You got a 30, 40-minute podcast. It is very likely, if you're attracting the right people, going to the right people, talking about the right things that those people are interested in, that those people are sticking with you 30 to 40 minutes, not like YouTube, just a few seconds or a few minutes. Don't worry about the total number of listeners that you have. Focus on the connection you have with those listeners. How long are they staying? And if you've got those listeners and they're staying 30 or 40 minutes, you can get more. That means you're doing something right. Expand upon that. You want help? Let's talk about it. Big Podcast Amp. If you like this podcast, if you like the newsletter at newsletter.bigpodcast.com, you want to grow your podcast, get more people to your podcast, spread a message with your podcast, make impact with your podcast, and make money with your podcast, you are going to love Big Podcast Amp. It stands for Audio Monetization Program. It's a personal coaching program that will help you do 3 things. 1, grow your podcast audience. 2, get people talking about your podcast. 3, as the name suggests, make more money with your podcast and your podcasting skills. There are a lot of opportunities for people who can speak. You are one of those people if you've got a podcast. You want more information? Here's how to get it. bigpodcast.com/amp. That's bigpodcast.com/AMP. Go there, read the letter that I've written to you, and read it all. It's going to take you a minute. If it's a match for you, let's make it happen. bigpodcast.com/AMP. It's support, not a donation. So many podcasters act like their podcasts are charity. It's like the guy ringing the Salvation Army bell. Ding, 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 ding. Throw a coin in the cauldron. Help me out, please. We are needy. Not a good idea for most podcasts. Now, if you've got a philosophy, maybe it's religious, spiritual, you're just trying to help people in some way, and there's no back end to it, there's no business attached to it, that might work for you. If somebody has a philosophy, a lot of times that person will want to share that philosophy with other people. If you've got the same philosophy, you're sharing it, they will pay you to do that work for them. It's not a bad opportunity if you don't have a back-end product or service. One of the ways to do this, buy me a coffee. It's been around for a long time. This is another reason why it works. Not just what I mentioned, that people want to spread a philosophy. That's part of it. But maybe even more important for people to get donations, or as I'm calling it, support. It's that people want to feel part of what you're doing. They want to feel connected to it. And if you ask for support and you do something like buy me a coffee, which is a website that I've got linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is a system that allows you to take support, you might call them donations, from people who are listening to you. If they use that or other similar services, FanList, Patreon, GoFundMe even, it allows your listeners to feel more connected to what you're doing. You might have heard about parasocial relationships, one-way relationships where somebody feels like he knows you and you got no idea who this guy is because you're sharing yourself on your podcast. These people have a deep connection for you. Even if somebody does know you, they've got a deep connection to you. They're listening to you, as I mentioned a minute ago, 30 to 40 minutes at a time sometimes more. You got these long podcasts, 2-3 hours. It's not uncommon for somebody to start playing one, pause it, pick it up again. It's like an audiobook. So if you've got a long podcast and it's not too boring, and you've got this relationship, people will do that. Each time they're playing it, they're getting more connected to you. So they've got this deep connection. You're providing them with hours of entertainment, insight, companionship. You're making their daily routines more enjoyable. By supporting you, they get a feeling of reciprocity. They feel like owners of your podcast. And I mean that in the nicest way. Not that they're trying to take over, but they're taking ownership for it. They're letting you do your thing, but they feel like they're part of it. They get a sense of community and involvement. If you don't have that back end to your podcast, the product or services, consider doing something like this. So buy me a coffee, FanList, Patreon. If you do have a back end, it gets a little bit messy because people think, oh, wait a minute, is this a charity or is this a business? Then if they give you the buck or two via the donation, even 20, 30 bucks, 50 bucks, whatever, it might not be as much money as you make on the back end. I don't need to pay for that $500 product or that coaching or consulting or whatever you've got on the back end of your podcast because they feel like they've already done the work of supporting you through a smaller donation. Something to think about. I've got more thoughts, got links for you for all these services. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 199. Does your podcast have an enemy? Howard Stern, arguably one of the biggest jocks of all time. I would say the biggest, except Rush Limbaugh made the most money. He was the most highly paid jock in the history of radio. Howard Stern, he hasn't done badly for himself. There was a time, this was in New York. This is during the days of broadcast radio. They're doing ratings. And it was something like 1 out of every 4 cars was listening to Howard Stern in the morning. That is a huge market share. So he's obviously very successful, making money, reaching people. And he calls himself the king of all media. He's had movies, he's had books, television. He's done a lot. And one of the things that he's done, I'm going to say he's pushed this forward, a controversial style of broadcast radio, pushing the boundaries of what's acceptable on public airwaves. I was talking about niches earlier. We talk a lot about niches on here. That's going to attract some people and really attract them. And it's going to repel others equally as much. And that's certainly happened. He had a lot of FCC fines. One of the interesting things about Howard Stern was that, and again, I'm probably messing up the numbers here, but it was a high percentage of the complaints that he had. And it was something like 50, 60% of the complaints were from one person. I would call that one person a fan. Obviously listening to Howard Stern, complaining, but, providing the ratings for him. Had a big interest in what he's doing. The conflicts that he had with the FCC, if you listen back to old Howard Stern stuff, and I'm talking 80s, 90s, he talked about it a lot. It gave him an enemy. And because his audience was so into what he was doing, that became that audience's enemy. I want you to think about that for your podcast. Do you have an enemy? If you look at the biggest radio host right now, Dave Ramsey is a great example of this. What's his enemy? Debt. He doesn't want you using credit cards. That's an enemy. Government seems to be an enemy with a lot of people, including Dave Ramsey. It's my money, blah, 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 blah. You listen to Dave Ramsey right now, he's talking about politics and things as much as he's talking about debt. Because there's always a political bent. He's talking about government programs. He's talking about elections, blah, 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 COVID vaccines. Look, I'm down the street from Dave Ramsey. And I'm assuming this stuff is getting out. I don't know. But being in radio and podcasting in Nashville, he's right outside of Nashville. I know a lot of people that have worked for him. He's an interesting guy. That story about him bringing a gun into a meeting, true. I know one of the guys that was there. Look it up. And for more information on this topic, newsletter.bigpodcast.com, issue number 199. Whoa! Spotify algorithm, tips for podcasters to boost rankings. If you learn how the Spotify algorithm works, you can optimize your podcast, you can improve visibility, and you can rank higher on the platform. Spotify is big for podcasting. I know. I'm as surprised as you are. It's not a great podcasting platform, but they've got the reach. And I remember about 6 or 7 years ago, saw a buddy of mine at the gym. He said, man, you do podcasts, right? I go, yeah, got a couple podcasts. He had just discovered podcasting. He was asking me some questions about it. And I asked him, how are you listening to podcasts? Spotify. And ever since then, maybe I've just been more aware of it. I've seen more and more people listening to podcasts via Spotify, especially younger people. So if you've got a younger audience, this is going to be important to you. Key things to know. Spotify's algorithm analyzes user behavior and podcast content to recommend shows tailored to individual taste. I've seen this in my music. You probably have too. I listen to Spotify when I work out. When I work out, I listen to a lot of electronic music. I listen to some kind of rock stuff. I don't listen to what I normally listen to when I'm not working out, which is R&B. Electronic stuff, especially house music. I get more and more of it. The more you listen to it, the more you get it. Same with podcasts. If you're listening to a podcast of a political bent, you're going to get more podcasts of a political bent. You're listening to financial podcasts, you're going to get more financial podcasts. This is groundbreaking. You've known this. And it's kind of funny, related to Spotify, they've got a weekly playlist that they'll send you. It's called Discover Weekly. You're not really discovering anything outside of that comfort zone that I'm talking about. So if you listen to a lot of house music, you're going to get more house music. Listen to R&B, you're going to get R&B. Rock and roll, you're going to get rock and roll. Same thing for podcasts. The algorithm's ability to surface content based on listening habits, engagement levels, and playlist additions is a game changer for podcasters. No surprise there. Spotify's algorithm prioritizes quality content and engagement over the size of an existing audience, giving new and independent podcasters a fair shot at capturing listeners' attention. Spotify doesn't care how big and popular you are. Spotify cares that the people who are listening on Spotify stick around. And what I said a minute ago about podcasts via YouTube videos, where YouTube watchers are watching this and watching that and watching this and then watching that. 5 seconds here, 3 minutes here, 2 minutes here. Podcasts are different. So it's very possible for you, if you know who you're going for, and you talk to those people and get them to listen on Spotify, if they're hanging around your podcast and listening to all of your podcasts, the 30 to 40 minute episodes, whatever you got, but most of the episode that you have, not just a minute here or a minute there, that is going to help you move up that algorithm in Spotify because it shows that you have value. So maybe, just maybe, it is worth you promoting your podcast via Spotify. And what I mean by that is when you go to a subscription page, and I want to name that again, bigpodcast.com/subscribe. There's mine. Steal it. You will notice what I'm doing is sending iPhone people to Apple Podcasts, and I'm sending Android people, because there's really not anything that competes with Spotify, to Spotify. Maybe something to think about. I don't give people a billion choices. If you listen here, listen here, listen here, listen here, listen here. And I could. Because people who listen to this podcast are podcasters, and you know podcasting. There's a bajillion ways to access podcasts. Most people do not know them, though. Most people know one or the other. Apple Podcasts, if they're on an iPhone, or Spotify, if they're on Android, especially sometimes people who are on iPhones. Spotify's algorithm relies on content-based filtering, scanning podcast titles, episode descriptions, and metadata to match content with user interest. If you're not doing your episode notes, you're not worried about titles, change that. Podcast titles, episode descriptions, and metadata. Collaborative filtering promotes podcasts that engage users the most through plays, follows, and being added to playlists. If you have a podcast on fitness, and this is an example out of the blue, whatever your podcast is on, think about other podcasters that are podcasting about the same thing. Then go to those people. So if you've got a podcast on fitness, go to other fitness podcasters, make playlists, collaborate with them. Do a swap with them for ads. If you like this podcast, you're going to like this podcast. Nobody is listening just to one podcast. If somebody's really interested in a topic, that person is not listening to just one podcast. They're listening to a lot of podcasts. So you have nothing to lose and everything to gain by connecting with other podcasters, by linking to them, by talking about them, by collaborating on episodes with them. If you've been on Spotify, you'll know that this is a lot of how Spotify works. This has been happening in the music business forever. And it's really happening now because of Spotify. And I'll give you an example of that. Post Malone. If you're a Post Malone fan, and a lot of people are, that album is all duets. Why? Because that guy goes out and finds the most popular artist and he says, come on, let's do a song together. And when you're going to those 10 or 12 other artists, you're going to see Post Malone mentioned on those pages. I worked for a band, and this has been 25 years ago. The very last album they did, it's called Crown Royale, a band called Run DMC. Run DMC was at the time, people were respecting them. They were probably the first big rap act in this country, but they'd been at it for about 20 years. There were new guys coming on the scene. And they were kind of in that sticky middle where they weren't yet legends. They were, but they were having a hard time filling venues. Their crowd had kind of aged out. Anyway, Crown Royale, all duets. And that would have worked even better today because we've got Spotify. People listening to Post Malone, oh, that guy's got a duet with Run DMC, Dolly Parton. They start listening to that other artist's music. Then you combine that with algorithm, whole thing blows up. Your podcast can do the exact same thing. Connect with people, man. You're not living in a silo, and neither are your listeners. Personalized recommendations are influenced by users' listening history and affinities, with podcasts that align with popular topics in a category being more easily discoverable. We've talked about newsjacking on here, meaning, well, I talked about it a little bit at the very beginning. An election. We've got a big election coming up in the United States. I realize this is going out all over the world. Your country has elections too. So let's stay on that topic. An election, something a lot of people in your space are talking about. People are interested in it. They want to talk about it more. They want to hear other concepts, or they want to hear what they already believe. I mentioned Rush Limbaugh earlier. The reason he was the highest paid radio jack ever is because he was speaking into a void. It was an echo chamber of people who already believed something, and he was telling them it was okay. Mega dittos, Rush. What does dittos mean? It's an echo. I agree. Nobody would argue with Limbaugh unless they thought they were agreeing with him and they said something different. And Limbaugh was a master of this. He said, well, I think what you really mean is, and he would say the opposite. And they would, oh, yeah, Rush. Yeah, that's right. That's what it is. Unbelievable. Spotify algorithm. I've got all these things that you can do to get better results from Spotify. They are listed in writing at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 199. Pop that P. You know I love putting jokes in the Big Podcast Insider. If you go to newsletter.bigpodcast.com, issue number 199, you will see this, but let's talk about popping that P. You've hopefully recorded yourself enough to know how to minimize plosive. But what about your guests? You're doing these remote interviews, you can't always control that. Even if somebody's in your studio on a great mic, great pop filter, can't always control for that. It's good to get a mic check on guests before recording to see how to best work with them. And I'm going to give you some sayings and some things that you can do to get people talking without being nervous. Don't just go into something. Get a mic check. This will change the audio that you get. I love working with different engineers because they've got a different way of doing this. One that I just worked with, I mentioned that NPR affiliate. She would get guests in and she would say, tell me PowerPoint peanut butter, PowerPoint peanut butter, PowerPoint peanut butter. So the P's and the B's. But before people do that, if you just want somebody to talk, you want to get those mic levels right. One of the most common things I hear is, tell me about your first car, get people talking. Most people, at least in the United States, they've got a car, maybe not in New York. My first car was a cab. That's cool. Tell me about your first cab ride, whatever. You're trying to get people talking. It's not about a car. But that's something that a lot of people can relate to. So you say, tell me about your first car. Or if you want a question, what did you eat for breakfast this morning? I love this because this tells you about where people were before they came into the studio. Related to this, I've got a trick I'm going to share with you just in a minute. First, I want to give you a few tests for plosives. These are kind of tongue twisters, but they basically have P's and B's, like Betty bought a bit of butter. Please pass the purple pears. Bob brought the big blue balloon. Paul plays ping pong poorly. The big brown bear bit a big black bug. Baby bunnies bounce in the blue barn. Pam's puppy plays in the park. The prickly porcupine posed for pictures. Some of them have that tongue twister element. That can be fun. Basically, what you're trying to do is get P's and B's. It doesn't matter if somebody says it right. Obviously, it helps if somebody has a good laugh. That's one of the reasons that you want to start with. Tell me about your first car. What did you eat for breakfast this morning? Build a little rapport, then go into the plosive test. Because some people are really nervous on the radio or on the podcast. We call it red light syndrome. And I've been amazed at how many people are nervous. I was interviewing a guy one time. This dude was the producer of the Dixie Chicks. Hit record after hit record. And he said, you're very intimidating, David. I said, what? You produced the Dixie Chicks, man. I'm intimidated. Anyway, we had a laugh about that. And that's the kind of thing, honestly, is when people can break down these walls and the nervousness, you included, that's how you have those real conversations. It's somebody talking to a friend. Yeah, you want to stay on track. You want to keep it on topic. It's not a chat. It's an interview, but there should be some rapport. And this is one way to do it. Please pass the purple pears. Get somebody having fun. You can do it with them. Your engineer or you need to get a plosive test yourself. I want you to steal this idea. If you're looking for bonus content, you want to give it to those Patreon members, you want to give it to the people who support you, or you just want to throw it out there to show you're a human. One of the things that you can do is ask the same question to your guest every single time and tape it. What did you eat for breakfast this morning? Tell me about your first car. That stuff is great. Maybe it's a bonus thing you attach after the interview that you did. You're trying to get your talk time up, that 30 to 40 minutes that you're doing. And again, I'm making this up, 30, 40 minutes. I'm just assuming you're going about 30 or 40 minutes. Maybe you got 3 hours, but you got something at the very end that people can hang on to because you know it's going to be fun. A listener says, hey, this podcast is interviewing blank, my favorite author. I wonder what kind of car he drove, because they know you always ask that question. Then you got that question attached to the back. It keeps people hanging on just a little bit longer, increases that listening time, which increases Spotify. You see how this works. And you built rapport over it with the listeners and with your guest. So attach these recordings if you get them. This is assuming somebody knows he's being recorded, by the way. Don't embarrass people. Say, hey, rolling tape, just let you know. We're not going to start the show yet. Mention it. Get the mic check, sound check, whatever you want to call it. Then you got use of it. You want more thoughts on these? You want those all in writing? Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 199. Classified ads for you. These are things that will help you to grow your podcast, get more people to your podcast, make more money with your podcast. NoteJoy. This is going to let you simplify your podcast production. Guests, co-hosts, producers, who you're working with. You want to work on the same document? NoteJoy is great. Whether you're collaborating in real time or across time zones, NoteJoy makes you feel like you're in the same room. What I love about it is there's a desktop version. There is a phone version, Android, iPhone, whatever you got. It's easy to organize your notes and work with other people on the same document on both mobile and desktop. I've got a special offer for you. You can try it for free. It's newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 199. Audio Pen. This is the easiest way to convert messy thoughts into clear text, including podcast outlines. You hit record, you start rambling. They got a brand new app. They got one for iPhone. They got one for Android. And I love this. This is how it works. You hold your phone up to your face. You start talking. I want to do an episode about this. To do a call back to my earlier ad where I was talking about Led Zeppelin, ramble on. Do it with Audio Pen and your phone. Blah, 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 blah. You get these great ideas. And you think, I'll remember those, but you don't. If you get your phone out, speak the ideas into it. When you get back to your studio, you've got a nicely formatted document. It could be a list. It could be a memo. Whatever you want, Audio Pen can do it. It takes your voice, your messy thoughts, and it creates a nice, well-formatted written document. You can try it for free. I've got a link for you, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Hey, thanks for listening to Build a Big Podcast, the marketing podcast for podcasters. I want to help you grow your podcast, get more people to your podcast, get more people interested in your podcast, get more people listening to it all the way through, and make a podcast that makes your mother proud. The best way to work with me, if you need more help, it's Big Podcast AMP, the audio monetization program. I want to get you making money, because when you make money, then you've got opportunities. You can shortcut things. You can buy help. You can hire experts. You can buy ads. You can really grow when you're making money. And that's the focus. So if you're interested in doing that, go to bigpodcast.com/amp. That's bigpodcast.com/AMP. I wrote a letter to you. Read it. Take a look. And if you want to work together, that's how to make it happen. Thanks for listening to Build a Big Podcast. I don't want you to miss an episode. Bigpodcast.com/subscribe. That will make sure that you don't. I've got a button to subscribe via Android, iPhone, and RSS. One button, that's all you need. Unless you want to listen on your iPhone and your Android and via RSS. I don't mind. It's all at bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Go there now before you forget. Do get subscribed, and I'll see you on the next episode of Build a Big Podcast. The big brown bear bit the big black bear. The big brown bear bit the big back. The big brown bear bit the big. The big brown bear bit the big back.